right, we have 2 whole hours. Yay, keep it moving. I've successfully got a charisma check. Got it all to move. Please be mindful of the camera.
Yeah.
If you have a ticket, come on in. Hi. Thanks for coming in, because I know it's like lunchtime and I myself could go for a bit of food, but hey, we'll be here for 2 hours. My name is Tanya. We actually have lovely meat tents provided by Tabletop Gamers. And Joe Kreider, if he is that, designed these lovely table tents. My name is Tanya DePass. I'm your moderator. And just a couple housekeeping things since we don't have slides or anything. We will talk for a bit. We do have 2 hours, so there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. When we get to the Q&A, it means question. Anyone who's seen me moderate the panel knows that I need this. I don't give me a question and a comment, your backstory, your character arc. I'm going to say this doesn't sound terrible. I kind of don't care because we have limited time, and I want to be respectful of those that are taking the chance of asking a question, especially in a panel like this where you may or may not feel entirely comfortable. So everyone can introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. If you have a burning question, write it down, and when we do get to the Q&A, we'll figure out a good way to kind of manage this, since we do have a fairly good-sized room, and I don't want to overlook anyone. So, starting at the end, who are you?
Oh God. Hi. My name is Kreider. I'm a former blogger and game designer. I used to write the popular feminist game called Make Me a Sandwich, and I recently released a game called Watch that kickstarted last year and is for sale at Indie Press Revolution.
Hi, my name is Frasier. I'm an adventure writer, game developer, cartographer, illustrator. I work for Green Ronin Publishing on the Mutants and Masterminds superhero game and do a little bit of writing on our modern age and fantasy age lines. You probably know me from the Pathfinder Adventure Path line that I only recently parted ways with, and I have my own company called Purple Prose Press that I only have one product for so far, and I kind of feel like I don't have a place up here because I haven't started any important foundations or written a own role-playing game.
And who are you? I will go last.
Hi, I am Trivia Fox. I work for Roll20.net as a production manager. So, none of the creative stuff on my normal hours, but I also illustrate, and you can find me on Twitter.
What is your Twitter?
Oh, my Twitter is dark_deer_ because all the other versions were taken.
Sorry, I'm a little bit silly. I'm sorry, what?
Deer as in the animal, or as someone who is deer?
Absolutely.
And I just realized my Twitter handle's not on here, but that's okay. If you look for me, you'll find me. I'm secretary pretty much everywhere online. I was mad about games about 4 years ago, and I started Universe Games, so if you see that on the internet, that was me. So I was just mad about video games. And now I run a nonprofit called Universe Games. I've been doing some tabletop stuff, and I am part of the recently announced project We Are All Monsters Here, along with myself. And I do a lot of stuff. I go to conventions, I talk about diversity online, I talk about a lot of things online. People usually get very mad at me. And I don't care, because they're not here. So what I want to start with is kind of not a state of the union, but a kind of state of queerness in tabletop. Where we think it is, how visible we are, how visible we can and can't be in many places. And, move on to there kind of talking about this both in the games that we're making and the people making them. So are there thoughts on kind of the state of queerness in tabletop that any of you are burning to share?
I think queerness is alive and thriving in the indie tabletop publishing scene. There are people like Avery Alder who are just like tearing it up and basically have invented like queer game theory, but it makes me sad that like outside of like that enclave of queerness, like it definitely hasn't translated to like more like mainstream areas of tabletop. And I definitely think like Gen Con is one of the better conventions in terms of like feeling comfortable like presenting as super queer, but like Origins is another convention I go to, and like I definitely dress more normal at that one because so like there's still a lot of spaces where it can be really threatening, and especially like there's kind of like pockets of queerness in tabletop, but then like there's also larger areas where it's just not safe to be visibly queer, unfortunately.
So, you have any thoughts?
Well, I'll say we've come a long way because we've gotten to the point where larger companies realize they can make money by pink washing their games without putting in some serious effort at reform. So that at least says that the gaming audience, if not the manufacturers, are more on board with queer inclusion and queer stories. And I'm hoping that as that new generation of gaming audience transitions to becoming gaming professionals, this will become less and less of a problem.
Tracy?
When I got hired at Roll20, because I had come from games, I did not disclose my identity or my pronouns or anything like that. And then like 2 months in, I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna, like, I feel like this company is probably safe. So I went and started, like, now everyone has to have their pronouns on their Slack profile, and a bunch of other people then came out as non-binary, and it really surprised me, and I'm sad it surprised me, but I'm glad that it happened, and I feel like that's kind of a litmus test too for how it's going. So I agree.
For me, it's interesting because I do a lot more in video games and tabletop currently. It's like a 60-40 split. And as far as video games, it can be very interesting when you disclose, especially when you are online, or if you do things like streaming, etc. And you're like, you have a queer community in your stream, kind of panels, or you're talking, or you play queer content. I find it still very iffy, and you know, I'm going to be that person because I'm the only brown person on this panel, and this is not what it should be here at Gen Con. So I'm going to be that person who brings up the elephant in the room because it's not just enough, you know, that I have to worry about being out and queer in these spaces. It's that I'm brown and there's not a lot of brown people. And I'm looking at the audience. There's not a lot of brown people in the audience either. So I don't feel as safe. Look, I'm not going to lie. Anyone who's met me for more than 2 minutes knows that I'm that person. And I feel like I'm yelling more not to like eat the microphone. But you know, tabletop has a serious issue with lack of representation, and let's be real here, a lot of our hobby is expensive, and it shuts out a lot of people because of the cost of books, because of the cost of coming here, etc. And you know, full disclosure, I would not be here if I wasn't here with Roll20 because it's too expensive, and I don't live that far away. So for me, I feel like the state of the industry is still very, very rocky when it comes to being queer and any other identity intersection. That's where I'm at. But I don't want to be a downer for the whole panel. I do want to talk about things that we consider successes in terms of representation. Because there are games that do have good queer content, a lot of good queer creators. And I want to highlight any that we know of, or even if we're doing our own work. Because don't be afraid to plug yourself. I mean, that's part of why people come to Gen Con to sell their stuff. So what is good queer content that you all know of that you would consider a success? I'm going to keep staring at you, Crystal, because you've written some of it. I've known Crystal a while, but I'm trying to be that, I'm going to give her that auntie look for anyone who knows what I mean, like that. You've done cool stuff. Please talk about yourself.
I'll talk about one of my personal successes that I'm really proud of.
Yay!
So anybody who knows me knows that my big agenda is putting trans characters in everything.
Woo!
And for the longest time, all of the trans characters I put into things had to be nice and not perfect, but optimistic and plucky and resourceful, and because your first representation for any given minority almost always has to be, as much as I hate to say it, respectability politics, because it's your first step in the door, and if it's adhering to any negative stereotypes, then that's what people latch onto as, oh, this trans writer wrote this trans character who is sexually promiscuous, so they're saying all trans characters, or all trans people must be sexually promiscuous. And so, no, you can't really give a fully realized, complex, or just jerk character for a minority the first couple of times you write it as a minority. In War for the Crown, Pathfinder Adventure Path that's just wrapping up here at Gen Con, I actually got to insert a trans character who's an asshole. She's in the very first adventure, and I got to write her as very low-key trans. The only thing that points towards it are like one sentence in her backstory that's a little ambiguous, and her equipment list, which includes hormone therapy. So it was nice writing a trans character who was nuanced and maybe kind of a jerk, and wasn't like, this character is trans and you fight her. It's just you fight her and she's trans.
Nice. What about you?
So I feel like I'm going to mention Avery Alder, and then I'm going to talk about something like. So Avery Alder like basically has been creating like her own area of queer game theory in story games, and it is awesome. She just kickstarted Dream Askew, which is like the gayest apocalypse game you will ever play. It's fantastic, and I'm really excited for it to be released. She also did Monster Hearts, and which the second edition recently came out and is for sale at Indie Press Revolution. It's a game about queerness through the lens of teenagers. And like not being in control of your sexuality and like not understanding how it works or what's happening to you through the metaphor of like you're a monster. Those are like my two go-to recommendations. In terms of something I'm personally proud of, my game, The Watch, is a game about women and femmes and non-binary people fighting against a thinly veiled allegorical representation of patriarchy known as the Shadow. You literally can't have a male PC, and I'm super happy with how it turned out. It actually got nominated for Best Art for the Independent Game Developers Network Award, Best Art, and like my contribution to that was basically saying to our artists, just like make it as gay as possible. As gay, diverse, and excellent, and I'm really happy with the work she put in on it. So, and that's also for sale at Indie Press Revolution. But yeah, those are kind of the things that I would say are like kind of the queer hotness in indie tabletop at least right now.
So I do not have any personal creative success in this area. And brought up Avery Alder, but this is actually a place that I feel like I am not as exposed or educated because I grew up playing D&D and was kind of just in the D&D hole from 1998 till now. I just started getting into Avery Alder games, and that's where I'm at. So I'm looking forward to going and checking out what else is there. But currently on Roll20, the streaming folks have been awesome. So there's a thing I can say. Trying to get more diverse casts. I'm looking at Alex, who is all they're doing. So that's one thing that I would say. But I just made notes about things to go check out in the vendors hall from everything everyone else has said.
For me, it's, so for those who don't know, I'm also on a D&D show, Rivals of Waterdeep, which is on the Twitch D&D channel. And our show is a bunch of brown folks and queer folks, and it was intentional, but we weren't like, look at us, we're so progressive, or rather I should say Wizards wasn't like, look at us, pat us on the back, we're so progressive. It was like, y'all know how to play D&D and you work together, please go have a show that is not all white dudes. Same with Dark and Dicey, that's also on the channel. And you know, in Roll20, because Alex has been very intentional in getting people who are not the same bearded, brown-haired, blue-eyed white dudes on their channel. Because I have been getting followed, you know, being here at Gen Con, getting followed by a lot of people on Twitter, and I keep having that moment of, didn't you just follow me? And I go, that is so indifferent, I feel like an asshole. But also, I've also been at other conventions and conferences where I've been mistaken for like maybe the one or two other black people they know in the industry. So fair play. No, really, I have been at a conference, and this has nothing to do with the topic at hand. It's just it's a quick little anecdote to show that, you know, I had that process because it's probably been done to me more times than I care to count. I was sitting with someone, we literally had our name tags, this other black woman got and walked away, and the person chatting with us turned to me and called me by her name. Yes. And this was at a professional conference, by the way. So, you know, it is what it is. I'm just trying to have a little humor because we have 2 hours to kill and I'm not that funny. But you know, now that we've talked about kind of what we think the state of things are and successes, I'm sure we can spend a lot of time on what we think are failures in terms of representation. And I felt that in my spirit, Crystal. Like, I could talk for 10 hours about this. You know, I will go first, and then I will turn it over to everyone. For me, there's been a lot of things where I wish I could have both characters that get to be assholes. I could be a brown character and promiscuous and queer and not have it be a thing. Not have to justify why I exist in this landscape. Because, you know, fantasy does have a problem of we can have drow, we can have elves, we can have trolls and orcs and magic and etc. But if there's a brown person, we need a 20-page addendum on why they exist in this setting. You know, add 10 pages if they are queer, because this clearly does not ever happen. So for me, a lot of things have just failed me in this setting. But one success that I didn't get to talk about, none of us brought up, was Blue Rose. It's crap, it's okay. As long as you just don't interrupt with the question before Q&A, we're all good. But Blue Rose is something, you know, I didn't know much about it. I found out about it last year at Gen Con and got a copy, and it's been a lot of fun to read through. It's like, canonically queer people, oh my god, what do I do with this? So that has been my success, is like my one little shining beacon, where it's written into the text and we don't have to do subtext as players. Because a lot of times we do queer settings, and we have a panel on that tomorrow or Saturday.
I think that's, no, we're in your Pantheon this Saturday.
Okay, so there is a Queer in Your Pantheon and Queer in Your Setting panel as well. We're good, got it. But you know, there are other panels talking about that, so I won't go too deep into it. A lot of times we have to rely on the subtext and what players do to queer things versus it being explicitly in the text, so that's why I like Blue Rose. But in general, a lot of texts just fail me in terms of being very explicitly queer, and especially when it comes to being bisexual. Because for me, when I do get to see bisexual texts or characters, there's a lot of the love triangle, or you're greedy, you're breaking up someone's marriage. That's not what we do. No one has that much time.
I believe the canonical state of affairs in Blue Rose is everyone is just assumed to be bisexual.
Right.
And if you're only attracted to one specific gender or one small set of genders, then that's kind of a minority thing.
Wow, role reversal, who knew?
Yeah, I would call that a huge success on Green Ronin as a company's part, because as hard as they tried with the first edition, one thing they were glaringly lacking on was trans representation. In fact, the only places being trans was mentioned was in the flesh-shaping magic power, where it specifically said using flesh-shaping for a trans person to have a more authentic body was always corrupting. So the only mention of trans people in the original setting was that being trans was corrupting.
But that's fixed now, right?
Yes, when they announced the second edition was going to happen, I specifically wrote to Green Ronin. This was my first contact with anybody at the company, and said, hey, there's this thing, and you've never heard of me, but in your first edition of Blue Rose, the game published 15 years ago, there's this one minor issue that I have like a hang up with, and they wrote me back and they're like, oh geez, we never even thought about this. Would you like to write the gender section? We'll give you 2,000 words.
Yay, Crystal.
But yeah, that's to their credit, and then they hired me.
See what happens when you speak up. But let's talk about other failures, because I'm sure we can come up with many failures, especially when it comes to non-binary representation, trans representation, aside from the first edition of Blue Rose. So there are other games where either you played them or read the text of anyone on the panel, so I'm not the only one talking, because I will talk a lot.
So just that I love D&D.
You love D&D, but you love D&D.
There's sure been some stuff recently where you can tell that they're trying.
Yeah.
Some. Examples. So in the player's handbook, you can, when they're describing like sex and gender, immediately they're talking about sex, and it's just real like chromosome essentialist in a way that I feel it doesn't need to be. They just came out with a book, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, where they talk a lot more about drow, which are already a sticky wicket. But they threw in that there are some elves who are able to change sex at will when they meditate. Which I was like, oh, that's cool. And then they were like, drow see this as an abomination and will murder them. And I'm like, cool. Like, this race that's already one of the only dark-skinned races in your whole setting is also the one that murders trans people. Nice! Like, I feel this is why consultation is an important thing to do before you come out with lore books. You want to pay some people to look at it and point at that and go, hey, wait.
At least the TERFs are canonically evil. Or the racism in having a canonically evil dark-skinned race, but
Yeah, so just FYI, if someone tries to make a joke about the drow, it will not end well for you. Because that is one thing I'm really not amused with, and someone tried to pull that to me on a panel I was on. It didn't go well.
Yeah, so there's some, like, I can tell that somewhere somebody is saying, hey, we need to have more representation for people, but there's not that connection of actually talking with people.
Intersectionality?
Yeah, intersectionality. And the non-binary representation is like not there at all. They'll talk about Corellin or whatever with elves, who's a, I don't think they say hermaphroditic anymore, but they used to in third ed. Genderless, I can't remember the word they use now, but that's like pretty much the only thing they talk about that isn't binary gender. So we have some places to work on.
We have a lot.
Yeah.
On this side of the table.
So, coming at it from the side of someone who like writes games and has freelanced for companies before, I mean, also as a non-binary person, it's part of why I make my own games, because there aren't games that feature people who look like me. So I just started making my own. Also, as an ace person, like, same deal, like, we just don't exist. And like the few canonically ace characters, when they get TV shows, become un-ace. I'm still mad about Riverdale. It's fine. No, it's not fine. No, it's not. That was sarcastic. But yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of failures though in terms that come back to companies hire the same 10 white guys over and over again, and it leads to predictable, embarrassingly awful results, like Wizards with their Dark Continent nonsense where they didn't hire a single person of color.
I was guilty of the exact same thing.
Right? So like you already have like a deeply racist source book, and now you're not hiring any people of color to go forward with that. That's not a good look. Or you know, the new Curse of Strahd, which actually manages to be more racist than the old Curse of Strahd. Yeah, I know, it's impressive. I wrote like 10,000 words about it. I was real mad. So, you know, like a lot of these failures of representation, you know, come down to the people who run these companies. Like, they keep making the same mistakes over and over again that could be prevented with literally like one not white dude in the room, right? Like, all of the really awful stuff in Curse of Strahd, it's literally like, this is so racist. This was literally written by all white people, wasn't it, right? Or you know, like any of the transphobic stuff that happens, you know, it's like, you clearly did not have any trans people on your team, right? So
Sometimes they have the trans people on their team and they just ignore them.
yeah, well, yeah, there is that too. But yeah, like, as someone who, you know, like, has been on the publishing side of things for 10 years, you know, it's very frustrating that, you know, in order to have queerness in games, we basically tell queer people that, like, well, you have to make your own games, because mainstream games are not going to make space for you. And, you know, like, we have been saying these things. I personally have been saying these things to a lot of my industry friends for 10 years, and they nod and they're like, yes, this is a problem. And then they make the same, they keep, you know, hiring the same 10 white guys over and over. And it's just, yeah, it's real frustrating.
Well, since you brought that up, it wasn't in my notes, but let's talk about that for a moment in terms of queer representation, but also race and intersectionality. So for those, just really quickly, who makes games in the room? Raise your hand, I go bite. All right, and I'm assuming all of us play games. Okay. So, what? Look, I know it's lunchtime and people are probably real distracted by the idea of food, but stay with me. So, for those people in the room, how many of you have heard of either sensitivity readers or diversity consultants? Okay, not enough of you have heard of this. So just very quickly, a diversity consultant / sensitivity reader is someone who can go over your script, your character concept, your character art, because words in your book are not enough, especially in a visual medium like role-playing games. And we can go, oh, that's bad, that's not okay, the way you describe them, you used food words. FYI, never use food words to describe people of color. And Joe, I'm going to tell on you. So Joe Carricker and I are friends, and there was a person who brought up a question on his Facebook, and they could not understand why this was a thing, or why, or it was something about a Kickstarter, and there was a African-specific module or a stretch goal was going to come out. The person was like, well, can I actually do this? Can I play this because I'm not black? And it sparked this whole conversation, and we came around to actually describing people of color, including them in your setting. But when you get a diversity consultant or sensitivity reader, whichever term you use, this can prevent things like the Curse of Strahd and other things where you've profoundly made it worse, because old D&D books are not the best at representation, and that's being very generous. But to make it worse in this day and age is really terrible. So have any of you ever tried to do or been approached to do diversity consulting in terms of queerness or other representation? And what is the value in it? Because a lot of people don't understand the value of having sensitivity readers. Oh, I'm talking too much as the moderator. You all talk.
I've been approached to do one sensitivity read, and I was at Paizo our default sensitivity reader for trans issues, intersex issues, and kind of queer issues, but several of our editors were also queer, so it wasn't as necessary there. And oh my God, there are so many things you catch that people never even realize are problems.
Yeah. I mean, I have only ever been paid to do it twice, because there's a real problem with people are becoming aware that it's a thing that you should do, but they don't want to budget for it. So about 3 years ago, I was, when I was going back to school, I was like, all right, I'm setting a hard line. I'm not doing consulting work that's not paid. And I can't even tell you the number of times where I've met some dude who realizes that I'm a publisher, and that, you know, he wants either Kickstarter advice or like a sensitivity read, but then as soon as I mention, cool, here's my card, we can talk consulting rates, I never hear from him again. So that is a problem, that it's so unvalued that like literally the moment you're like, this is gonna cost you $20,
Only $20?
they vaporize. Well, I mean, and for, you know, like a basic, like, let's sit down and talk, but, you know, like, yeah, it also depends on, like, the size of the, you know, the product that you're reviewing and, like, how much time you have to put into it. And there's also, like, a lot of emotional labor that goes into, like, telling white dudes that they did a thing that's awful. That isn't, and that brings up another issue of, you know, as someone who's been involved in the industry, something I am seeing more of is, you know, publishers hire sensitivity readers, but then they don't listen to them. And it puts their sensitivity readers in a real bad position, because a lot of the time they're kind of in a position where it's known that they were hired to consult on a game, but it looks real unprofessional to like bag it after it's been published. So then, you know, it's like, man, this thing I worked on is still racist, because they didn't listen, you know. So it's, if you're gonna hire like a diversity consultant, you know, like, I think you almost need to give them veto power over like certain things. Like if you're gonna put the effort in, like you need to actually listen when they tell you, like, no, you can't do this, you need to rework it. And you know, sometimes that's inconvenient. You know, sometimes you might have to do some major rewriting. And I think, yeah, a lot of publishers only see like the, you know, the setback in terms of development timelines, and they see diversity as an inconvenience.
I get to do that a little bit for Roll20 when we have publishers asking us about what things we'll post, you know, or that we'll put on the platform. And so, you know, often I'll read through a PDF, and one was bad enough that I made a Google Doc where I listed every page that something pissed me off, and it ended up being 3 pages long. So we ended up not posting that because I wasn't passionate enough. We didn't move forward on that product. And both me and my supervisor are both pretty passionate about these things, and it is hard when we have to let some stuff through, because it's one of those, well, it's only this one sentence, you know, and stuff like that. So that ends up being hard on your heart a little bit, because we are a midway point. You know, we're not a publisher. We're a software in between. So there's only so much that we feel we can do, but we try when we can.
So for those that don't know, I do diversity consulting quite a bit. And like you said, a lot of times people will be like, I need you to fix this thing because we realized it was terrible and racist. And then you go, well, here's what it'll cost you per hour because this is my time. And no one ever gives you enough time. They want it like yesterday. So that's like an extra 10% to 25% because you need it in a rush. If anyone in the room is thinking about doing this, and this is where I'm also an asshole, if you are a white person and doing diversity consulting and you have no marginalized identity, you might want to think twice about that because you already get to be the majority and you cannot speak on experience that is not yours. Obviously, if you have some marginalized identity, I'm not going to tell you no, don't do it. But I will often find white dudes that want to tell other people about diversity when it comes to either being queer or whatever, and it's like, cool, but your experience is not universal. My experience as a black woman who's bisexual is not going to ever match up to what you know or could try to tell someone. So if you write a character that is black and bisexual, within about 2 months, I'm going to know the right dude wrote this, and it's what you think we're like. So think about this if you are writing RPGs, if you're doing any kind of content. Think about the fact that the industry, which is put to a lie by this room, is not mostly white people. The brown folks, the queer folks that are broke, they can't come to this convention are out there playing games as well. We are very privileged to be here, so you all need to think about that, just because you can be here at Gen Con or PAX or whatever, does not mean that you are the majority of the market and the only ones that this industry should serve. So think about that. Again, a show of hands if you are someone making games but has gotten a diversity consultant. Okay, so this has to be better.
Oh.
Yes, you're on the panel. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to throw down the gauntlet. You all need to do better if you do this panel again, and I get to come back. I would love to see more hands in the air, and also see more brown people in the audience, and not just me at the table. Yes, I'm going to hammer on that because that's the kind of person I am. But when it comes to not just queerness, but race, since we keep bringing up racism and racist depictions of things. The other thing that doesn't come up a lot and is left out as part of kind of the umbrella is non-binary representation, agender representation, or lack thereof. So I don't know if anyone had thoughts on it, what we can do better. So I do want to kind of veer into ideals and things we'd like to see and what we can do better before we open up to Q&A.
Literally have any non-binary character. Like, just any non-binary character. I don't think I've ever played, and I play a lot of video games. I don't think I've ever played a video game with a non-binary character. I don't think I've ever read a source book that had a non-binary character. Every non-binary character that I have interacted with in games has been one that I have had to write myself. And that sucks. And like the same goes for asexual representation. We exist. But like in terms of seeing yourself reflected in media, like we're finally now getting to a point where we're starting to see, more trans representation and more queer representation, and some of it is bad, but it's better than it was. But in terms of non-binary and asexual representation, like it's just even have one. Throw me a bone, anything. Because it just, like it's great that we're having this panel, but then I don't even personally identify, like I identify as queer but not LGBT because of the number of times where like people have said like, yeah, fuck TERFs, but also asexual people aren't queer, like in the same sentence, right? And so it's a kind of never really feeling included in that.
I got to play Blue Rose on a stream for Hyper RPG once, and they gave us all pre-gen characters, and there was one that was non-binary, and I read over it like 3 or 4 times, being like, did I miss where they said she or he? Because I couldn't, like, I didn't believe that this actually printed thing that came from a book used they, them pronouns. On a different panel that I spoke at, somebody had brought up what can video games do better, and I said, that screen when you're at character creation and it says boy or girl, you've lost me.
Like it was out the gate.
Yeah, like I'm already having to go and make that choice. Like, you can say choose which body shape. Like even Pokemon Go figured that out. They said which one looks like you, and you're like, okay, it's still like kind of a girl, kind of a boy. But they didn't say, are you a boy or a girl? Give me a list of shapes and a number of pronouns, and I will choose. Thank you.
MechWarrior does that.
Yes. Didn't they just...
The new MechWarrior game on Hairbrained Schemes.
Yes, Hairbrained Schemes just did it, so if you want to go tell them good job, do so.
Yes. Our plug is please go by Battletech. Many people work very hard on it.
Yep.
And-
Many queer people worked very hard on it.
Yes. And the usual dark corners of the internet were yelling about, oh my God, there's an extra pronoun. Wow, it's one word, it'll be okay.
But you don't even have to choose, for the record.
Yeah.
I would personally love to see actual intersex representation that doesn't fixate on their genitals and doesn't spell out that them being intersex is because of demonic influence.
And I also like, I'm sure we'll talk about this on other panels, but the idea that queerness equals villainy.
Yeah. Although that's kind of backfired because now I'm hot for villains.
Hands up if you love monsters and you're queer or trans.
I mean, Maleficent, come on now.
Oh my God.
Scar.
So now the panel was just talking about like our queer ass crushes.
Oh, let me get my list. Yeah.
So now Crystal will emulate the GIF where the person has the scroll that goes in the
We
room.
have 2 hours talking, we can get through a lot.
One of us can get through all of them.
Yeah.
Just be on team asexual sadness.
Sorry.
No, I don't like it's. No, I mean, the thing about like, yes, don't make, but like it comes back to like, you need to have more than one queer character.
Yes.
Right? Like, and like they need to be different flavors, and that way like you can have evil queers as long as you have lots of them. Well, I mean, it's like a whole flock of dialogue. But again, it comes back to that like respectability politics thing of like you shouldn't always have to have model queer characters, right? Like let's have some awesome queer assholes. Like some of my favorite characters in media are like the ones where I'm just like, oh my God, I want you to die in a fire. But you can't have that unless you have more than one queer character. And the same thing goes for non-white characters, right? Like you shouldn't have your only person of color be a villain, but like also what are you doing only having one person of color, right? Like you should have lots of them, and then some of them can die or be evil or be nice or whatever, and you're not making a statement about that group of people. It's just a thing that's happening to that one person.
As the brown contingent, I would like not to die.
I've been pitching the same story to a bunch of different publishers at this point. That is, the protagonists are 3 trans girls of very different like racial and socioeconomic backgrounds, and I keep being told the same thing in every rejection. It's nobody's going to believe there are 3 trans women in this one story.
We travel in flocks.
I feel like I need a badge that
We will
says
have questions
welcome
later.
to multiple bisexuals.
We will have questions later. No, we're not having questions yet. I will call when you want me to.
They obviously are not familiar with like. Flock is an accurate description.
I mean,
Because we're white.
Oh, I like that.
We're a flock. We're officially, that is our new queer tabletop terminology. We're a flock of queers.
Wait, if there are enough of us, is it a murder?
Yes.
That
Oh,
feels
wait.
appropriate.
But then, damn it, we just like memed ourselves. And see, now I'm thinking about like a crow versus a flock and murders and oh dear, I didn't let him ask a question. Sorry, I'm being snarky because that has happened to me on every panel I've ever done. Someone wants to interrupt, and when I don't let them, they leave. So, we've got about an hour and 15 minutes left, assuming that someone keeps time and keeps us all on task. One thing I'd like to talk about is, other things we'd like to see, not just what we want to see, but how do we get there? Because it's always good to say, well, it'd be better if we had this, it'd be ideal if we had that, but we never ever talk about how do we get there? Because a lot of people have an ideology, they have an idea of how we get there, but we don't kind of talk about that. And most families generally have an hour, so you don't really have enough time to get into that. But since we've generously been given 2 whole hours, which is dangerous with someone because I will talk your ear off if you let me. How do we get there? Because I mean, we talked about like getting more people writing, etc. But you know, in an ideal world, if you got more ace characters, for instance, how would you want to get to that point?
That's a super good question.
We can come back to you.
Yeah, I think we need a minute.
Okay. Crystal.
I think it's kind of a commentary on the state of the industry that none of us are quite sure how to get to point B.
I mean, I think it's just hiring more people. Like, as a queer kid, like, I didn't have the typical college to internship to entry-level job that then I get to, like, you know, ride for a while and then get moved into similar positions at new companies. So it felt, when I got hired, that my boss was taking a chance on me because I didn't have the typical, you know, white dude in software resume, and I think he sees the benefits in that because I think I do a good job and Roll20 is doing good. But like, it takes somebody in a management or power position saying like, I'm going to fix this, because I don't think people that are down at the bottom, that's not a great metaphor, but like, it's harder for us to make change. We end up having to go make our own games and do our own spaces, and then we don't get the huge banners and the, you know, big vinyl things on the floor telling everyone to come look at our games because we're in our little booth.
Right.
So,
And I mean, the fact that those games are doing really well, though, means the big publishers have to start taking notice.
absolutely.
And it's slow and it's imperfect, and there are definitely backslides, but I feel like the fact that indie games are in such a renaissance right now, I know at the Paizo office people have talked about the indie games they like and what elements they want to incorporate or what freelancers they want to hire based on the indie games they like.
So I think my answer to how do we get there is it has to start with like looking at the spaces like this and the people organizing the spaces that they are in charge of need to be actively asking themselves who is not represented, why are they not represented, and what can I do about it? Because like the path for like every marginalized person I know who works in games has very much been not the, it's not the same as, you know, like the Ken Heights and the Robin Laws where like they've just, you know, they made the right friends 30 years ago and like have been working continuously since then, right? I mean, for me, like I got my start kind of at Gen Con where I gave fan art to like one of my favorite designers and that kind of got me started of, you know, like interacting more and it was like a gradual thing. Like I just didn't one day like I argued with people for 2 years that I wasn't a game designer like after I published my first game. So
I'm not sure that's how that works.
but like you know, imposter syndrome is real, man. But so I mean I feel like there's this process that happens with marginalized people where it's, you know, there's a pipeline that kind of happens where, but you don't have those people kind of taking their first steps and getting started if your space is unwelcoming, right? And there are, Gen Con has been getting better. Like this is my 13th Gen Con, and like I've seen it go from around 10 or 15% women to around 40 in the main areas. I mean, there's some enclaves where it's just dudes. Like I don't go to the CCG hall or the minis hall because it's just a sausage fest. But you know, like it starts with with people organizing spaces asking themselves who isn't here and why aren't they here, and then not just shrugging and saying, oh well it's too bad that they're not here. Like you have to actually go find the people and recruit them into your space. And that will really give people the chance to feel included and see themselves in the hobby and kind of give themselves permission to think about, making their own games or writing for games companies or whatever. So I think that's where it starts.
Yeah, and to keep going on that, it's when you have content, especially if anyone raises a red flag about it, or if you get player feedback and they go, this isn't good, or you made this, let's say, bisexual character or a trans character and they read as a stereotype, that's when you should take a step back. But also, you shouldn't be in a position where you have to outsource all of your diversity consulting. There should be people in the room. And I normally would not advocate for Twitter because Twitter is the devil. But most of the people I found, especially non-white dudes that are in this space, have been on Twitter. Dungeon Commander, I think it's Dungeon, I don't know if Commander's truncated or not. I had a really good thread about this just the other day, or maybe even last night. So find people that are not like yourself, or when people are going, well, I like this expansion, I like this game, but it'd be great if there were canonically queer characters, it'd be great if there were people of color, it'd be great if there were, trans characters, and there isn't like a 20-page explanation on why they exist in this setting. So those are the kind of things you have to think about. So it's getting people in the room, getting them to stay in the room, and making sure they're welcome and feel safe. Because I used to work in higher ed before I did this as a full-time gig. There are many places where I would not be out as a bisexual person. There are many places where I just couldn't talk about certain things because of the climate. And if we're supposed to sit at a table and be buddies and be nerds together, I should be afraid to wear my rainbow D&D shirt or have a button that says queer or bisexual or what have you, because that tells me it's not welcoming. I don't go to game stores anymore. I don't go into game stores and play or shop because they've not been welcoming spaces to me in any facet of marginalization that I experience. And if you walk around the store and hear slurs, you hear dudes saying the same things, or you don't see anybody like you other than the same brown-haired white dudes, it's a clear signal that I am not welcome in this space. So it's not just making games that we need to make better, it's places where we buy them, it's places like this where we can see more, obviously queer folks proudly wearing rainbows and bi pride flags, trans pride flags, etc., and not worry about it. Because I do worry about this stuff when I go to conventions. I'm just about hitting the hour mark, and I don't want to keep talking too much. I'm going to give plenty of time for Q&A. Is there anything else we haven't touched on before I open the floor for anyone?
There is one thing I'd really like to touch on.
Of course.
It mostly touches on being trans in the industry, and I would imagine to a less, well, probably the same degree, being a racial minority, fetishization.
Oh, yeah.
Because, Jesus, if there's anything that feels worse than outright hatred, it is the people who sexualize you, and you know they do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, speak on it.
It is. So I've done sensitivity reading. I did sensitivity reading for an author who wanted to be super inclusive, and he'd written this trans intersex character who was going to redeem the villain by. Am I allowed to say the F word?
Yeah.
Okay, by fucking her into goodness with her magic Fuda dick. So I had to sit this author down, who was so genuine and so heartfelt in his convictions that he was doing good representation, and explain, one, that is not how intersexual people work. Intersex people do not have a fully functioning penis and a fully functioning vagina. Two, the fact that she was intersex was entirely because she was descended from a demon. Three, the depiction of this, he insisted in all of the metatextual elements that this was not a woman, this was something in between, but kept kept mentioning that she refers to herself with female pronouns, she considers herself a woman. And everything about this character boiled down to her genitals and how those genitals would redeem this other evil character. And it was a very long, very painful explanation of why this is completely inappropriate on so many levels. And he was angry at me for bringing all of this up. And I found out 2 years later, he's still got the same character describing them the exact same horrific way in a completely different product. And wow, if there was anything that made me stop working with a writer faster than their really insulting, like, mean depictions of trans or queer or intersex characters, it is that level of just sexualized, like, personal wish fulfillment, just grotesque focus on this one element.
So, I just want to jump in and say to the people who raise their hands about making games, like, if you take nothing else from this panel, please take when a marginalized person tells you that something that you have done is a problem, listen to them. Don't get angry, don't get defensive, don't attack them on Twitter and try and get people to dox them. That's not a real life example. You know, like actually, like, put your ego to one side, because, like, as a white publisher, the gift that I give to you is the knowledge that you're going to fuck up. It's going to happen. So, like, accept that, and then when it happens, you have the freedom to decide, am I going to be one of the asshole publishers, or am I going to actually be responsible and be accountable and do better?
And understand that thinking you're an ally and actually listening are very different skill sets. You can believe you're helping and believe that you want the best for these people. But if it's not your experience and you are profiting off of it and you are not listening to any feedback or input, then you are honestly being as bad as the people who spit in our faces.
I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on this whole demon thing.
So bad. Oh my god.
And that brings up the other thing too, that when it comes to, you know, with fetishization, and I'm going to be a little vulgar, I apologize, please cover your ears if this will bother you.
I can't be worse than what I said.
Crystal, you've known me a while.
I apologize and retract my statement.
Black folks, do not have like foot-long cocks. They cannot save you with them, and the magical healing dick trope in any sense needs to stop. Because it is a way to fetishize black men with Mandingo trope, or, you know, etc. So, like I said, I'm going to be a little vulgar. It's early, I haven't eaten yet. I've had breakfast, that's it. I need more protein. Because that is a way that, and then women, black women and brown women in games are often hypersexualized and treated as if that is their role. They're bed witches, they're barmaids, etc. That's how they're treated in games. Or it's like, I will sleep with you and I will listen to all of your problems and be a mammy stereotype, etc. So there are many ways in which fetishization crosses boundaries. So that's a way in which you just kind of have to think about what you're writing. And again, it circles back to, if there are not actual brown people in your office, in your group, or your table, or people that you can go to and go, can you read this and let me know how this is? Then you should be paying people to do this. Because I have seen some things, y'all. I have seen some things. Trivia, did you have any final thoughts before we open up to questions?
No. I got very distracted by all of that.
You wrote trivia. That's a good job. All right, so you all get a whole hour for questions.
Wow.
All right, slow down. You all got real excited about that. So for Q&A, we don't have another mic, do we?
Nope.
So what I will do is I will ask people to raise their hands, and if you can, please stand and speak if standing is okay for you. And also, have a question, and I'm going to put a caveat on questions. Do not stand up and ask away, which you can basically get away with making an offensive character. Do not stand here and basically ask for permission to do a terrible transphobic, homophobic, biphobic thing in your game. We are not going to give you permission for that. If that's what you were seeking, go to somebody's altar, you will not find it here. And with that, you can ask questions. Yes.
Can you repeat the questions that you hear?
Sure, I will do my
Thank you.
best to repeat questions. All right, all the way in the back. Would you like to explain the light?
Everybody just goes right
Fine,
at me.
I will explain. So the question is, we keep using the term TERF, and usually when you see it online, it's capital TERF. It means trans exclusive radical feminist, and basically they are transphobes under the guise of feminism.
They're also incredibly anti-non-binary. They get super angry about using queer to describe non-binary gender identity, and will get real militant about it being a slur, just so that non-binary people don't have a word to describe themselves. They are.
You go ahead. I was going to say they're also aggressively intersex phobic in that they think children with, they have terrible words to describe intersex children's birth conditions, but that all intersex children should be corrected at birth so they can be raised as a right gender.
I mean, they're also behind shit like the concept of gold star lesbians. For those not familiar with gold star lesbians, that's a lesbian who's never touched a penis. Which, it's, yeah.
Wait, your own or somebody else's?
Yes.
But yeah, so the short version is any person who excludes transgender people from women is the
They tend to be very conservative. They tend to side. They're actually currently, the organized TERF movements in England at least are teaming up with Focus on the Family and other conservative American religious right groups for funding and platforms. So that tells you the kinds of people they're in bed with and the kinds of things they hurl at the trans community, the non-binary community, to a lesser extent the lesbian community. Yeah.
They're terrible. Don't be one of them.
don't be a TERF. It's a good one.
All right, we got a whole hour, and a lot of people jumped up for questions. Okay, so I'm
We
gonna.
have people form a line.
Yes, please form a line down here. I know we don't have a mic, but that will make it easier for us. And if standing is not an option, please raise your hand. We'll try to get someone to call out your question. All right, so I'm going to go back and forth. So you first, and then you.
So I am I'm in the very early stages of preparing to write a comic book aimed at LGBTQ youth, or for youth center. And while you've given some excellent examples of blatant don't do this things, maybe you could give some examples of some subtle things that maybe someone who means very, very well might slip up on, in terms of queer, trans, intersex, all that.
Right, so the question was, we've been very blatant with examples of kind of what not to do, but are there more subtle examples where a well-meaning person could slip up on them?
Something that I'm a big fan of in my development work is I write all my NPCs and I assign genders, and then I don't look at it for a week, and I come back and I see where I've gotten it wrong. Because even as someone who blogged about feminism for 6 years and has been publishing my own games for 10 years and has marginalized identities, you have internalized oppression, and you're going to get it wrong. So build that into your development process. take a first stab and then come back and say, all right, where did I fall into a stereotype? And I find like a lot of that is just even building that into your process and being aware that you need to kind of give yourself space in order to come back and be critical and look for the things that you missed the first time around is like a huge help.
I would say don't kill your gay characters. There's a lot of attempts to like point a shunning finger at society by killing a gay character and then blaming society for it, but no, the author did it. So bury your gays is a huge trope in the queer community, and with lesbians especially, you just don't get attached to gay characters if they're women because they're going to die a tragic death because refrigerators are very useful plot devices.
Don't make being queer the crux of kind of like their existential angst, like, oh God, I'm queer, no one loves me. And, that is the angst and woe and ennui of their life. Because, as many of us in the room know, there's more to us than being queer. So, it is part of their identity, but not the be-all, end-all consuming thing that drives them.
And mine would be that neither their sexuality nor gender or any other part of them is due to trauma. That is one that happens a lot. Yeah.
But thank you very much.
Hi, I'm VJ. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm not a game designer, but I am a podcaster for actual plays. And you guys talked about a lot about the failures of various NPC or various things you don't want to see. But what are stories that you do want to see as NPCs? Like making sure that you what are the stories that would be interesting to you to hear?
I don't know, talk at once.
What was the question?
All right. The question was, what are characters that we would like to see? What are stories that we would like to see as NPCs? So not the bog standard kind of innkeeper's wife that's hanging around and giving ale on occasion. I would like to see brown characters that just kind of exist, like this brown dude's the Fletcher in town or the butcher or something. And I get to go on adventure, I get to give a quest and not be like the random, proprietor of the whorehouse, because apparently that's all brown folks can do. I'd like to be queer and just have it not be a big thing, like, the innkeeper has a wife and is femme-identified. Or, maybe folks just want to live together and have a bunch of cats, and that's who they are.
Yeah, I was gonna say being normal. And and not having it be like the character enters and you're like, oh, an important gay.
I would have named a character that now.
Alex did that in their Mouse Guard game. Their parents are lesbians.
Yeah.
And it's just and so their mouse character just talks about their two moms. And it's fine. Like not a big deal.
Yay. You for gay mouse moms.
Anyone else?
I like seeing practical solutions to queer needs. Like a magic fix-all solution seems great, but it kind of makes trans characters in a fantasy setting. It removes the connection I have to them. So if a trans man can just get a magic belt that gives him like a body he finds appealing and the ability to father children and all of these, that's great wish fulfillment and that's important sometimes. But there's also, those are aspects that a real world trans man can't really relate to exactly. It loses some of the struggle that makes this a character you identify with. So I think there's some value in finding like practical solutions. Like in D&D, they also have alchemy, and is there alchemical hormone therapy? Are there surgeries, or are there minor magics that are much easier to get a hold of than a cursed belt? where, you know, over the course of weeks or months or maybe years, you can like coax somebody's body into a shape that feels more natural for them? Are there solutions that are within the reach of people who aren't professional adventurers?
So something that I am passionate about is, and something that I'm getting more into is games that don't center interpersonal violence. And those are the kinds of stories that disproportionately target queer characters. So I think it is inherently queer to have more stories and games where, you know, you don't actually have a mechanical system for doing violence, like interpersonal violence. My game to watch, it's a story about a war, but it also, there is no, if anyone's familiar with Apocalypse World, it's an Apocalypse World game. There's no move for do violence to a person, and I have had dudes tell me that that is a problem. So I think it's one of the most challenging like limitations on gamer imagination, and I definitely would love to see, I think it would be queer as hell to see more stories where, you know, you have challenges and struggles, but violence is not a solution that is going to be on the table.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I'm a LGBTQ gamer, then I sit down at a table and there's someone at the table who has done something or said something that is offensive. Either to me personally or to the minority as a whole, what is a good way that I can go to that person either at the table or off the table and say, you did a thing, here's why I did that. What's a good way to have that discussion?
Well, it'll probably depend on your group dynamic. I mean, how well do you know people? Are you the GM? Are you playing? I would say X card if it is truly offensive and you can't keep playing in that moment. Oh, I'm going to explain.
Okay, sorry.
And the question was, I'm sorry, I started answering before I repeated the question, was let's say if you are a queer gamer, LGBTQIA, and someone sorry. This is what I get for speaking I speak with my hands and it gets me in trouble. You know, what can you do at the table to work with that, either talk to them in that moment or later on, how to bring that to their attention? And so I mentioned the X card. That's a card that sits on your table. And so if something comes up in the game, be it a plot, be it something someone has done or said, and it's upsetting, triggering, etc., and I say triggering in the sense of actually triggering someone, they need to get up and leave, they need to take a break, you can tap that card, and that's the signal to the GM to go, oh, we need to go another direction, maybe we need to take a 5-minute break, let people collect themselves. So if there's an X card on your table, and if you are the GM and you've never done this, you can introduce this as an option. You know, it's not like you have to do this from session 1. You can say, this is something we're implementing in case things come up, because you know your players, you know the people you're playing with, hopefully. I don't play with random people because, well, reasons. And, you know, if you don't have that kind of mechanism at the table, when you do take a break, because at some point we all like to eat and get up and stretch, say, hey, can I talk to you about this? You know, the thing you said, the thing you did was upsetting to me or bothered me. Can we talk about this if it's a short break, if not right now, then maybe after the game? You know, and be prepared. Some people get defensive. They're going to get mad. Oh, it's just a game. No one cares. And be like, well, I care because I'm sitting at a table with you for 2, 4, 6 hours. I am also a very confrontational person. So my method may not work for you because I may scream and yell. But I would say bring it up at either a break point. Don't interrupt play for it. Well, this is like something where you're like, what did you say? Like, did this actually come out of your mouth? Or again, if it's a short session, you don't get a break, bring it up and don't let it linger. Because that's the thing, a lot of times something happens, we don't bring it up until it happens again and again. And then at that point, it's like, why didn't you say anything? So bring it up at the time it happens if possible.
As white people, if you have any degree of social capital in space, I think it's important to, we don't do that here is an amazingly useful response because people don't argue with it. It's like, if they try to justify it, you can just repeat yourself. We don't do that here. The X card is functionally similar. It's very useful for shutting down nonsense. You can just say, I'm not interested in dealing with that right now. The only other thing I'd recommend is, Jay Smooth has an amazing video that every white person in here should go watch, called How to Talk to White People About Racism. It's like 2 minutes, and it's basically the gist of it is, when you talk to people, tell them, hey, that thing you said or did was racist, and not you are racist, right? And he does a better job of explaining it, and is generally awesome. So, but yeah, definitely something that will help is because as white people we take up space. So holding space for marginalized people by just and you don't have to make a thing of it. Just say we don't do that here. Thank you.
I run an open table game group for board games for LGBT folk in my hometown. And there's content in some games that is just problematic. At what point do you clean up a game versus do you nix it from your collection? There is Bang the Dice game where there's a mechanic for the Indians attack and deal damage to all the players. And it was written by an Italian man who doesn't have the right cultural sensitivities, and they're Indians. There is a board game that I've never owned, but a friend has called Mombasa that is about colonizing and exploiting colonial Africa, and I'll never play it again.
Right.
How do you draw the line, and how do you clean up that kind of thing to make it a safe space for?
So the question was, when you have games that are problematic, be it tabletop, but also board games in this context, how do you clean that up? I would not start yelling about the African game. I will let other people talk first.
I mean, I think the question is how central is the problematic thing to the game? Okay, if you can take it out and it will be just fine, then just do that. If the entire concept of the game is colonization, then that's a game that you shouldn't play. But yeah, it's one of those things where if it's
Is
easy.
renaming and redefining something, or do you just?
I have a friend who's taken Sharpies to their Sentinels cards because the art is not the best, and they just drew more clothes on all the female characters.
I did that to a bunch of Pisa books while I was working there.
Yeah, or if you want to put stickers over something, changing something. I'm a big fan of modding board games. If the thing is incidental to the gameplay, then
I had one of those somebody gifted me one of those card games that's the Cards Against Humanity type. It wasn't Cards Against Humanity, but something like that. And I was like, I'm gonna see how many offensive cards I pull out of this. And it was over half of them. And then I just threw it in the trash can. So,
We don't play Cards Against Humanity.
yeah.
We don't hang out where people are playing Cards Against Humanity.
I would say just modify it, and like Anna said, if it's not central to the plot of the game, throw it out. Or novel idea, just kind of modify it, like, we don't do that here, but B, this is why I'm changing this game so people understand why. Because the problem I found is if there are not any people of color at the table, it may not get people noticing that this is terribly offensive. So the other part is to get your table to be not just white dudes. Yes.
As a consumer and as somebody who doesn't have a Twitter, because I feel like I am a 90-year-old woman, what's the best way that I can communicate with a larger gaming company of something that I'm unhappy with? If I see something as a consumer, I don't like that, it's very offensive to me or this group of people that I do know. What's the best way to get in contact that isn't just an angry tweet that somebody can take seriously?
So the question was, what is the best way to get in contact with a company, especially if you don't have something like Twitter or other social media? So even if you do have Twitter, don't angry tweet at people. Don't do it.
It's never the person who is in control that's on the Twitter either.
Yeah.
Right. The person doing social media for something you're tweeting at probably is not the person who wrote the thing you're mad about. But also, there's a real human being behind that tweet. And it isn't effective. As having talked to people in the industry, that will get them to not listen to you so fast. I would see if there's a website, if you do Facebook, if they have some forum, someone you contact them, maybe in a less public way because forums are the devil as well. They are. And I say that as a BioWare fan. Find out a way of contacting them. This may be either a feedback form, an email address. You go, hey, I played this, or I bought this, or I was playing with friends, and this is what I found offensive. I'd like to give you this feedback, and give your feedback in a constructive way. So everyone that has written a paper has gotten constructive feedback. You're non-constructive, you're terrible, you're all racist, evil people is not constructive. So if you can format it in a constructive way and find a way like email, form, because I hate forums, but that may be your only option to talk to them. And I'm not going to say Reddit, because Reddit is like the Uber devil. And I mean, personally, I don't go on there.
Most of your favorite game companies don't maintain a presence on Reddit.
Also,
Yeah.
There's,
oh, sorry.
I was going to say, there's a few small ones, but you're better off looking for their company website.
Also, generally, like, I just find that a private communication channel, like DMs, or if that's an option, or email, or something like that, it's much easier to call someone in. And if you do it in a situation where it's a one-on-one interaction, like, they're much less likely to, like, get defensive and kind of blow you off. Because when you make it a public thing, then it's like their reputation is under threat, and they feel like they have to defend themselves. So, I mean, yeah, it can take some hunting through websites to try and dig up someone's email, and in some cases you might have to say, hey, I want to contact this person, but their information is on the website, can you put me in touch with them? But yeah, I mean, it's a small industry, even the biggest companies like Wizards, like, don't really have all that many people working for them. So, like, I find, you know, reaching out to people is like directly is a good way to do it.
Yes.
Hi. So I've been thinking a lot about teaching about queerness through games, and there's been a lot of talk about teaching about queerness through passive means, through representation. Well, not that representation is passive, but less active educational tools about queerness. And I've tried that before in different groups to little success. But what would you say the state of the industry is in terms of actively teaching about queerness through mechanics and through games about teaching? Because I'm sure most people in this room are really tired of having to explain to cis straight people all the time really basic information, and maybe putting that in game forms could be a bit more helpful, more, especially for the experience of empathy for games. So what would you say the state of the industry is in terms of that?
All right, if I mess up your question, please let me know.
Sorry.
So the question was, what is the state of the industry and state of games in more actively doing representation and education versus the passive representation that we just happen to exist in these areas, especially when it comes to empathy and learning? So the designers on the table.
Anna mentioned earlier that Monster Hearts 2 uses being a monster as a lens for being a queer youth, which I think lines up perfectly, because I don't know a queer person in America that doesn't identify as a vampire or a werewolf or an ogre or but the mechanics kind of back up the whole notion of being apart from the world, and the writing again backs up this notion of you are set aside from the mainstream, and part of this informs your your physical and emotional needs. And I think you can do it using similar game mechanics in ways that are less confrontational than Monster Hearts 2 is, because it is very much a game about very carnal, very immediate satisfaction.
Anyone else?
I mean, I hate to keep coming back to the stuff that I did, but one of the big sections in the watch is actually each character archetype has lists of things that you pick, like appearance and what does your clothing look like. There's also one for gender identity, and then in the very beginning of the book, I have a super basic description of here's what these terms mean, right? And there's like only 5 options, and cisgender is almost always last. Like, it's actually shuffled for each playbook. But honestly, like, I think even just a big thing is combating defaultism by making explicit that people have to choose to be cisgender or heterosexual, right? Like, challenge, like, you know, and then just let the characters be people. Because like there's no such thing as, you know, this is how you play a trans character, or this is how you play like a non-binary character. But I think honestly, like a lot of what I've been doing that I found very effective in terms of helping, because I've run my game for a lot of cis white dudes, is just making it a choice. Like, you can play a white cisgender character, but like you have to choose that.
So I'd say the state of the industry as a whole is not very up on that, but there are games doing it, and just to answer your question.
Yeah, we did kind of open up with that a little bit, but and it's been recorded, so once this goes up online, just look for, so it'll be on Tabletop Gamers YouTube, right? So we did kind of open that, but we weren't very specific about active versus passive representation.
Yeah.
Good question, thank you. Yes?
You guys mentioned the module Curse of Strahd. I recently just joined the Curse of Strahd campaign with a bunch of my friends. I haven't gotten too much into it to know, but how is it offensive? Just so I can be aware of it, just so I can
Yeah,
maybe...
you covered that pretty.
Do you want me to talk about it?
Well, someone talked about it. I have the book at home.
Okay, so the Vistani, I wrote like 8,000 words about how mad I was about it. So the Vistani are every single offensive trope of Roma people ever.
They did it worse than they did in second edition?
All but one of the Vistani characters is lawful evil, so that's fun. They're the Mongol folk, which I mean, so if you're curious about reading more, I would recommend going to my blog, Go Make Me a Sandwich. I did a series of posts about Curse of Strahd, actually. It's also super ableist with regards to its depiction of mental illness, and it's pretty rapey. And like I could have my own panel about just me talking about how mad I am about Curse of Strahd. So I'm just gonna like plug myself and say if you go to my blog, you can find a really detailed treatment of like the problems in the book.
And like a GM should be able to look at that and make some choices about how, like, you can in your world of I ran Curse of Strahd while looking at all of this, right? And I was like, I have to fix this or I'll die. Like, I can't GM this. So I just stripped out all of that.
Is anything left?
They're just people. They're just people now. They don't need to have, you know, Vardos and hip scarves. They're just people. They
don't need to literally steal babies.
And I actually think I found your blog while I was looking at like how I fix this. I feel it is possible if a GM cares, personally.
And because we started answering, because I'm a terrible moderator, the question was, how can you make the Curse of Strahd, or what are the things to look out for the Curse of Strahd, and transitioned into how to make it better? That is one of the newest pieces out from D&D. Because I have it at home, it's still like unwrapped, and now I kind of want to leave it where it is. Sorry, Greg Tito. So yeah, that was our question. Did you have another question, or was that it?
That was it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve.
Hi. So, as both gamers and as designers, we deal with a lot of fictionalized and imaginary worlds, many of which are not earthly. And so when we're dealing with the inclusion of queer people and marginalized people, how much of that inclusion and that relationship is affected by our real world experience of oppression or marginalization that may not exist in that setting?
Oh, you just had to give the hard question, didn't you? We know, Steve. Well, let me repeat it, and then feel free to answer, Crystal. And if I mess up the question, please correct me, Steve. So as queer folks who both play and design games, when we put in, marginalization and oppression in places that, may not have it, like a fantasy or future setting, how much of our own life experience influences that?
And, what is it like to be, how do we depict queer people in a setting where their queerness is not so queer, shall we say? It's not so unusual, not strange, not marginal.
And so how do we depict our queerness when it is not strange? It's not like, oh God, gay people, what do we do? So Crystal, you were chomping at the bit. Go for it.
Well, I just wanted to say, we are covering more or less that exact question in detail tomorrow at 1 o'clock for Catharsis in Gaming in Lucas Oil Meeting Room number 10.
But for those that can't go to the panel, Crystal.
I just wanted to take a moment.
I know.
But yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to figuring out what aspects of being queer do you need to see in your fictional characters? Is the strength and character you build overcoming difficult things in life an important part of being queer, or is just the romantic attraction or your gender what is central to your experience being queer? And there's no one answer, I think, but
I think one of the things that I'm most fond of is asking questions and making it clear that the group will then have to answer them. So making the start of the campaign explicitly have a phase of collaborative world building. And saying, well, there are queer people in your world, but then leaving it as a topic of conversation for the individual group. How do you want to deal with that? Because I have friends who want to be the most oppressed queer in every game. They're like, this is cathartic for me, so please give me all the queer oppression. But I also have friends who are like, I want my pretend fun times to not be as oppressive as my real life. So I don't want that content on the table. And both are super valid. So, I think it's important to kind of figure out, how to establish that queer people are there and they're a fact of the setting, but then just also figure out what questions can the group kind of work through that will help them build their own vision of, their version of the world that you're presenting that they want to play in.
One thing too, it depends on the setting. So if it's a futuristic setting, it's hard because do you want to have that disingenuous moment of racism and sexism and homophobia is gone, but the people at your table are very much living in the now. So I think in your kind of session zero, you're setting up your game, you're setting up what you will do, it's worth having that conversation going, how much do we want to touch on this? Because some people may be cool with it, and we have people like Anna's friend who wants to be like, I am the most oppressed queer that has ever been a queer person on any facet ever, versus me where I'm like, I don't want to be in this reality at the table, just give me a beer and some dice, I'm okay. I don't need this in my game. But it's also, I think kind of not going into this utopia, everything is solved, is useful because, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Hopefully it's better than the present, but that's a whole other panel. I think it really depends on your players, but you have to be mindful of that. Is that if you do put it in your setting, just tell people, yes, it's the future, yes, it's fantasy, but this still could happen. And if that's not okay with anyone at the table, now is the time to speak up. Or if you want to have a character that you come across them and they've been exiled because they're gay, is that okay? Is that okay that I put this in as a game master? I'm not telling you when it could happen, but it's a possibility. And communication with your table, I think, is the key here.
I've never played in a game where anyone really wanted to keep being oppressed. We all live in the beautiful world where no one gives a shit, and we can be as gay as we want. So that just made me have some critical thoughts, what would it be like to play in a game where I had to work through anything?
No, thank you.
Feelings games.
Did that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
Hi, Anna and Crystal, you both mentioned the Monster Hearts and specifically the Apocalypse World system. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about the way specifically Apocalypse World like 2.0 handles your character's looks and maybe especially with the sexual person concept of the special moves in Apocalypse World.
And either of you want to repeat the question before you answer it?
Yeah, so the question was thoughts on the second edition of Apocalypse World and how it handles aceness with the special moves and also, sorry, the other...
Your character's looks.
Oh, your character's looks. Okay.
Pick a body type, things like that.
So it's been a while since I've read the second edition, and I'm frankly more familiar with the first edition. But overall, like Vincent was a huge influence on me in terms of making it explicit that if you want to play a cisgender character, it has to be a choice. I personally also really enjoy how like gender and body type are explicitly separate axes, right? So you can be like a towering, hulking trans person, or you can be like delicate and petite, or really making it clear that those two are not like tied. I don't remember enough about the intimacy moves for second edition, but in terms of Apocalypse World representations of asexuality, Monster Hearts 2 again. Avery actually consulted with these people on how to kind of include the ace experience, because it does kind of suck when people are like, oh, it would be great if everyone was bi or pan, and that's like, well, team ace. Yeah, overall, like I'm a big fan of how Vincent has handled it, and he definitely has influenced my work, and I've taken what he's done and kind of run with it. But
I'm not ace, so I can't really comment on what it's like for the ace experience. And I read Monster Hearts a year and a half, 2 years ago, and the parts that stuck with me were the elements describing the setting and the mirroring of queer experience with monstrous fictional experience. So I only skimmed the rules. Yeah.
Thank you.
yes.
Cool. So Anna, you mentioned at one point the idea of removing violence from a game is this kind of radical queer way to look at gaming conventions, and we've been talking about Avery Holder a little bit, and she kind of uses radical collaboration in some of her games. I'm just curious, what are some ways that you see people look at things beyond explicit references to identity, better ways of designing a queer game, if that makes sense?
So the question was, and again, correct me if I got this wrong, ways to look at things explicitly in terms of designing queer games, like removing violence, other means like that mechanically.
Mechanics, politics, power dynamics,
Okay.
that kind of thing, yeah.
Politics, etc.
Sorry, did you?
I've been working around with an idea for a support mechanic where everybody has a unique aspect that they can succeed at, and if they assist you in doing the same thing, you get a token from them. And collecting tokens from all your fellow players makes you a more well-rounded character and gives you future story opportunities. That's only a rough draft right now.
I can't believe I forgot to mention Starcrossed. Yeah, Starcrossed is awesome. It's a game of, romance between two characters, and as implied by the name, it's two characters who really want to but really shouldn't. You can play it as incredibly gay, and the designer is gay, so I think it just, unfortunately, there's not a lot of good examples, and so that's kind of why I'm trying to, I personally don't know what that genre of games looks like. I think Japanese designers have been playing with it for a little bit longer than we have. There's a genre of game called Honobono, of which Golden Sky Stories is one. But there's not a lot of English language stuff that I can kind of point to as an example, and I think we kind of have some figuring out to do of what that looks like. I know I'm still exploring what that looks like for me as a designer going forward, so. Thanks.
You're welcome. Yes.
So, you touched on this a little bit at the beginning with the elves.
With the what?
With the elves in D&D and their use of gender. But I'm curious, you're talking about villainizing these representations, but I'm curious about your opinions on representations and coding of queer characters, whether it's everything from a butch female orc or a feminine elf, or all the way up to characters that are asexual because of some racial thing, or female dwarves with beards, that sort of thing, that aren't villains, but they are more inhuman, and they represent sort of these ideas, these more queer identities. I'm curious what you think of that.
So the question was, what do you think about basically non-human characters with queer identifiers? So they like to talk about the drow, talked about other things earlier. So kind of what is our take on that? So not necessarily queer coded as villain, but non-human as queer coded, correct?
Yes.
I want to yell. Well, because for me as a person of color, I often, there's a reason people say orcs and things like that, because orcs were coded as black people. I'm conflicted because, a lot of times, well, I'm not conflicted. I'm trying basically not to just yell and scream and use a lot of F-bombs, especially since we're almost done. I think it's terrible because I think it shows lack of imagination where you can't create a non-human character without giving it all of the terrible human traits or things that you think are terrible, I should say. Because, when we get like effeminate characters, effeminate elves or whatever, that is clearly coding them as a bad thing if they're like chaotic evil, something like that, where they are not part of like the standard existence of the world, and you're going, these are undesirable characters. And same thing is done with, non-human characters having very clear black characteristics or things like that. I think it's terrible. I think there's a better way to do that, and I think it shows a lack of imagination when non-humans are coded with very clearly queer identities, because it shows an inability to go beyond like what you could do with those characters. Because you could have like a super femme orc barbarian who loves pink. Oh wait, that's the Iron Bull.
Yeah.
But you can do that and then play with it versus falling into terrible tropes. So I think it's bad, but others.
I'm conflicted because I like when she big.
Yeah.
Speaking as a woman who big,
Yeah,
when she big than me?
Yeah, me big. I did an art mentorship with Todd Lockwood, and I got to tell him that his drawing of a female orc, which I found out was kind of a joke, but a big strong lady that's making like a face is what made me feel like I could be in D&D when I was a teen. So it's rough, right? Because like I found that as representation as a 14-year-old, but it was played off as a joke. So yeah, I'm also conflicted.
I feel like there's an element of queer culture that is identifying with characters that were supposed to be jokes.
Mm-hmm.
Or monsters.
Yeah.
I find it hard to answer this question because I think the conception of race in every fantasy setting is deeply problematic and needs to be thrown out the window. There is no way to say that this is the defining characteristic of a group of people and then call it a race that is just not, even when it's a heroic race, it's bad. Burn it all down, I guess is my answer.
I mean, I kind of related to that when I got tapped to write about half-orcs for Pathfinder. I mean, I've got no experience as a racial minority, but also half-orcs are also very much a social construct, and so I drew heavily on trans experience to describe what it's like being a half-orc woman in human society and knowing you will never be as small as the women around you or as conventionally attractive as the women around you, or being a half-orc male in orc society and knowing you're never going to be as big as the other men around you, or as strong as the other men around you, or considered as valid as the other men around you. So it's not a perfect solution because this is before I met Tanya and learned. I believe you mentioned, like, offhand at one point, yeah, like, orcs are depictions of black people, and it took me, like, 12 seconds and, like, because it just never clicked.
Yeah, there's a lot, because, I mean, and this is my closing thought, and we'll do a quick closing round. A lot of times this happens not because people are malicious, but because they don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
A lot of it comes into privilege and never having to think about not being represented. And, you can be, white and queer, white have other marginalizations, but those other marginalizations don't give you the I'm more oppressed than you card. That's called playing the Russian Olympics. Don't do it, it's terrible. Because, I can pretend to be straight if I ever got brainwashed and decided this was a good idea, but I can never walk out of the house and pretend to be anything other than black, or at least a not white person. There are moments in which you have to think about all the ways in which you can pass, in which you can walk about. No one's going to see that you're queer unless you're like, I have rainbow everything. And, by pride or whatever it is that you're wearing, unless you're very out and proud about it, most people are not going to look at someone and make a second guess about their identity or what have you. So you have to think about this. So I have many, many thoughts, but we will be here past our time if I start going into that. So quickly, who are you, where can we find you, and do you have a closing thought?
So you can find me through my blog, which is still online. I just don't have to write for it anymore. It's called Go Make Me a Sandwich. I also publish games through my game company, Peach Pants Press, and The Watch is currently for sale at Indie Press Revolution. I guess my closing thought, if I have to limit it very concisely, is that ally is a verb. It's not a noun or a destination. You don't ever get to describe yourself as an ally, and you don't get to say that you are an ally or that, yes, I have done the work and I am now an ally. It is a process, and it is a process that you have to be continually committed to. And especially for a lot of the white people in here who are queer, it's easy to kind of end up at loggerheads with someone who doesn't share your marginalizations. I actually, became friends with someone who is now very close to me, but he's a man of color, and we basically had a situation where we were on different sides of an issue, and I accidentally was like, someone please do something about the tall, scary brown man. And when he pointed that out, I was like, oh my God, I absolutely was incorrect. But then, I was lucky that he was willing to listen to me. And I said, can I tell you about my experiences with gamer men and why gamer men are like a uniquely terrifying class of human being for me? And what we realized is that we both were correct in our feelings, but we also were incorrect in that we weren't considering the experiences of people who don't share our particular marginalizations. And I think that's kind of what, especially I want to communicate to my fellow white gamers, is don't get so lost in your own personal impressions that you're not thinking about how other people's experiences are different. And especially because we do take up more space in gaming, we need to hold space for people who don't share, who don't look like us.
I'm Crystal Frasier. You can follow me on Twitter at Amazon Chic, CHIQUE. You can also find my website, thecrystalfrasier.com, because crystalfrasier.com was taken by Wedding Planner. So if you need wedding planning services in California. And yeah, I guess my closing thought is a more general version of what Anna had to say. You will screw up. It is inevitable. No one has every experience, so it's important to accept going in that you will screw up and you will need to learn more and you will need to make amends, and try to be reading sources that are outside your personal experience whenever you can, and listen when people tell you you've done something wrong, because it's really easy to get defensive.
Trivia?
I'm Trivia Fox. You can find me on Twitter at dark_deer_. And also I work at roll20.net, so have fun playing games. And my final thought is that I am, being that I was a little nerd all the way back in 1998, I did not think that I would ever have so many people that also shared things with me, like it always felt like it was going to be white cis dudes forever, and that I was never going to have a place with the people. And I'm just so thankful that there's so much queer programming here, and that we have come so far, and that we get to have these conversations, and that they get to be more in depth. It's not where it was like, when can we have like a queer character? It's now like, how do we make better queer characters? And people are making their own queer characters. It blows my little mind. So that's my final
My name is Tanya DePass. You can find me everywhere online as Cypher of Tears, CYPHEROFTYR, and also the nonprofit that I run, I Need Diverse Games. Our Twitter is I Need DIVGMS, because I Need Diverse Games is too long for a Twitter handle. Final thought is, think about what you're doing, be intentional in your intersectionality, leave a space at the table, and accept that you will screw up. Because, you're going to screw up, but don't get defensive. Learn to take feedback, learn to give feedback. And if you're going to do the work of an ally, do the work of an ally. Don't expect a pat on the head and a cookie for it, because that is not being an ally. That is being basically a white knight going, look, aren't I a good white person? No, you're not when you do that. Do not speak over people. Do not speak for them. Do not take up too much space at the table. Ask if you can help, and if you can do so, then do it. And lastly, if you make games, get diversity consultants, because I really don't want to read any more medieval fantasy where brown people are all slaves, or we don't exist like boats and other means of travel don't exist. So with that cheerful thought, we are done. Thank you so much for